Welcome, everyone. This is Libby Mucciaroni, Associate Director of Education, Technology, and Member Engagement at the Organic Trade Association. I'm pleased to welcome you as the Organic Center presents How Farming Systems Impact Bionutrients. A couple of housekeeping items before we start the presentation today as folks start to join us. First of all, this webinar is being recorded. Any resources referenced today will be shared in the chat box as able and in follow-up communications after this webinar. In the next 2 business days, all registrants will receive a follow-up email, including PDF slides of the presentation, helpful links, and a registration link to view today's recording. During registration, we ask that you let our presenters know if you had any questions on today's topic. With over 250 registrants, we're so thankful to have such a diverse and engaged audience. Your questions have been taken into account in the panelists' presentations today and in preparation for our Q&A session. For any questions or comments you may have during our discussion today, please share them with us in the questions panel on the platform. Our presenters will respond to your questions as time permits during our Q&A session. And finally, if you happen to have any technical issues throughout the presentation today, please notify us through the questions panel, or you can email me directly for assistance, and I will do my best to get back to you while we're running the webinar today. The Organic Trade Association is a nonprofit research and education organization based out of Washington, D.C. They work to conduct and convene credible evidence-based science on the environmental and health effects of organic food and farming and communicate the findings to the public. The Organic Center's work is supported by companies and individuals who desire a sustainable and secure food system that promotes the health of humans and the environment. The Organic Trade Association is a membership-based organization for the organic industry. We ensure that all parts of the organic value chain have a strong voice in government and in our communities. We bring farmers, processors, distributors, retailers, and others together to promote and protect the growing organic sector. OTA represents its members to government on sector needs, market development and promotion, and strong organic standards and regulations. Members also receive the latest information and quick answers on organic regulations and standards in the United States and around the world. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by a truly dynamic group of panelists for today's webinar. I'll let Dr. Jessica Shade let you know a little bit more about them. Dr. Jessica Shade is the Director of Science Programs at the Organic Center, and she'll come on to tell you a little bit more about today's topic as well as our speakers. With that, I will let you know. I will now hand things over to Jessica.
Thanks so much, Libby. We are so excited for this webinar. We've been looking forward to it basically since we started talking about it. This is an issue that a lot of companies, a lot of consumers are interested in. So it's going to be really fun to hear from these different panelists. So I'll go ahead and introduce everyone. Dan Kittredge has been an organic farmer for more than 30 years and is the founder and executive director of the Bionutrient Food Association, a nonprofit whose mission is to increase quality in the food supply. He is one of the leading proponents of nutrient density. Dan works to demonstrate the connections between soil health, plant health, and human health. We're also joined by Sara Newmark, who is the COO at True Grace, a new brand of nutrient-dense supplements. She is an experienced executive with a demonstrated history of working in the health and wellness industry, and has become an advocate for the power of business to make a lasting systemic change. In addition to her professional experience, she is the board co-chair for Green America and also sits on boards for the Coalition for Supplement Sustainability and the Retreat Farm. She also has a 10-acre organic and regenerative farm with her family. We also have Dr. Andrew Smith here, who is the COO for the RODALE Institute, where he oversees the research and farming operations. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Agronomy at Cornell University, his Master of Science in Entomology at the University of Maryland, and a PhD from Drexel University in Philadelphia in environmental science with a concentration in molecular and population ecology. He farms organically with his family, growing small fruit and raising sheep for wool. We also have Tina Owen. She is the Senior Director of Food and Agriculture Impact for Danone North America. She is passionate about creating communally beneficial systems of agriculture that incentivize farmers to convert to practices which will increase soil organic matter. She has built supply chains, financing, and grant models, and consumer-facing programs that achieve real goals. So we are so honored to have all of you here with us. And with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to Dan, who's going to kind of set us up for what we're talking about today.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. I'm sorry we had some technical difficulties and my camera's not working, so I guess we're just going to be having my voice. This is the first of our slides, which I was hoping to get to in about 5 minutes or so, but I'll just doing without the camera. I'll speak and know that not everything I'm talking about has to do with the slide here. The BFA is, as we said, a 10-year-old organization focusing on increasing quality in the food supply, and by quality we mean flavor, aroma, nutritive value, health-giving attribute, which we think connects to soil health, plant health, farm viability, and as I said, human health. So we've been working for the past 5 years on a project to sort of bring empiricism to this space. Our thought is that it really depends on how a crop is grown, what's in it, what its effect is on the ecosystem, and in many cases, labels and certifications don't necessarily correlate with that. And so that's been our focus from the beginning, is to say with that most nutritive value in food, and how can we support that being done more in more places more well. So we recently launched the Bionutrient Institute as a sort of a formal structure around which we've been engaging the science for now 5 years. We have 3 basic objectives we've tried to accomplish. One is to begin to characterize that nutrient variation in food. There's a lot of conversation about, well, USDA averages for what was in broccoli or carrots in 1950 are different than what's in broccoli or carrots now, and some people say nutrient levels have decreased in food. Perhaps the samples that the USDA took out of the grocery store in each of those decades averaged lower, but our thought is there are really high quality producers of broccoli, and there's some really not so excellent broccoli, whether it's beef or milk or rice, whatever the crop is. There's significant variation, and so we didn't see a lot of data out there to show what that variation was, and so we started to characterize it. We set up our first lab in Michigan in 2018, and we worked with growers and consumers and allies to send in samples of carrots and spinach from farmers markets, grocery stores, and initially in that first year identified variations that were on the order of 3x to 5x to 18x to 25x, not percent, but x. So literally this carrot would have 3 times as much calcium as that carrot, or this leaf of spinach would have 18 times as much iron as that leaf of spinach. In 2020, we added 4 more crops. We established a second lab in partnership with Chico State University in California, and we looked at lettuce and kale and cherry tomatoes and grapes as well. Again, saw that significant variation. And we also started working with growers to document their environmental conditions and management practices before they sent the samples in, and then also to send in soil from the top 10 centimeters and the next 10 centimeters. So we could overlay the connections between management practices, environmental conditions, soil metrics, and nutrient values. And that was part of our second leg of the stool. The first one is to define the variation. The second one is to correlate that, connect that with causal factors. Was it the variety? Was it the soil type? Was it the fertility program? Was it the tillage practice? Microbiome, epigenetics, climate dynamics, really begin to tease out those corollary dynamics. And then in 2020, we actually set up a third lab in France in partnership with a group called EcoSense. And we were able to assess 21 different crops. And again, between roots and leaves and fruits and grains showed quite significant across the board nutrient variations in food, which did not connect directly to an organic label or regenerative claims or farmers markets or anything. It really seemed most to connect to management practices, not to labels. And that's a really important point I want to hope to emphasize here. And the third leg of the stool is sort of to be able to provide those assessments of, what's in this carrot in relation to that carrot to anybody who wants to discern it. So to move beyond the binary, this is organic or it's not, this is regenerative or it's not, this is biodynamic or it's not, this is non-GMO or it's not, to move beyond that sort of black and white framing to a more of a continuum perspective. These carrots are in the 20th percentile, these carrots are in the 40th percentile, these carrots are in the 80th percentile, et cetera. And so, yeah, I think we actually built the first meter in 2017, but this past summer, we're able to ship out globally. I think we're, in hundreds at this point. First generation calibrated, handheld, consumer priced spectrometers. They're calibrated to 10 crops right now. They're calibrated to nutrient variation, not nutrient density, or as this webinar frames it, bionutrients, which is, the next step in this process is we've shown that the variation is significant and it exists. We've shown it connects very nicely with what would be called regenerative or organic or biological management practices, which correlates positively with increases in soil carbon. And we've also, been able to build that hardware, model of like bringing transparency to the market so that economic decisions can be based on those nutrient levels, along with whatever other metrics you want, but to be able to bring that to the market. That's really been our work in this space over the past few years. We initially did help sort of popularize the term nutrient density to refer to this nutrient variation in food. We certainly, coined the term bionutrient, and really getting into the nuance of what those words mean, I think is perhaps a conversation that people are interested in. I'm not sure if we have time for it completely today, but I think there's a really important paradigm shift opportunity here as we begin to understand the connections between soil health and ecological system function and nutrient levels in food and flavor and aroma and pest and disease resistance and human health. I think there's it's not just a triple bottom line, it's a quintuple bottom line or something for those that want to engage in this understanding, to be able to verifiably make claims about the superiority of what you're producing or what you're providing and marketing. I do think it's a very exciting opportunity for those who are willing to look into that. So those are my sort of opening comments or framing perspective. I do have a few slides here. Again, sorry, my computer camera's not working today. But Libby, is it you? Are you doing the slides? So people probably have seen this one here. So as I said, we did 21 different crops last year. Two of them were oats and wheat, and we worked on farms of some pretty significant average acreage. I think it was about 3,000 acres was the average size of the farms. I don't know if it was about 50 farms or so that we worked with. And here's just one of the metrics that we tracked, and that is depth of tillage. Again, we collected probably 50 different data points about the variety, the planting date, the tillage time, the fertility program, the soil type, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But here we have in the top 10 centimeters of soil, light tillage, which we define as less than 6 inches, decreases organic matter on average by more than 20%. And then heavy tillage of deeper than 6 inches decreases it to at about 35%. And then subsequently, on the next soil profile, we see that similarly decreased levels of organic organic matter based on how you treat that soil. This has been one of the critiques of the organic process, as a lot of the farmers operating on scale do engage in heavy tillage, and we can see here that that does correlate with decreased organic matter in the soil. Next slide. Thank you. Yeah, there we go. So again, here we have the effect on nutrient levels in this wheat based on the depth of tillage. And you can see decreases in 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%, 70% on average, correlating very nicely with depth of tillage. So we can see this connection between management practices and nutrient levels and soil carbon effect. Next. We tried to take those nutrient levels and say, okay, what's the variation in wheat of calcium from the bottom to the top? And we got rid of the outliers and we averaged things down. So it's this chart is to percent RDA, US RDA. And so, calcium in wheat, one serving can be between 5% of your RDA and 13%. For phosphorus, it can be between 3.5% and 60%. Potassium between 5% and 22%. These are significant nutritional variations. This is in US RDA per serving. So we factored this out here. Look at zinc on in oats and wheat, almost none to 34%. I'm not sure if people are tracked the UNFAO sort of commentary on stunting and things like that. There are some elements and nutrients which are really systemically deficient across the board in many parts of the world and have very negative effects on human health outcomes. Look at that variation from basically no zinc to 34%, and zinc is one of those 5 or 6 key nutrients globally that is a stunting issue. Imagine this is all we're talking about here is just the way you treat the soil. The way you treat the soil dramatically affects the nutrient levels in food. Next. All right, and so here we have about 300 wheat samples. Go to the go forward. Yep. Okay. 50 farms, 38 in the U.S., 12 in France, 11 states. This is polyphenols by antioxidants, and what we see here is that a group of growers in the Pacific Northwest who have been focusing on working together to and marketing on nutrient density are showing themselves as superior across the board. So the point I want to make here is it's not so much about any one thing. We all have different soils, we have different climates, we've got different genetics. But if we begin to work together and share and learn the opportunity to really provide superior quality crops that can then be marketed accordingly, which have all these other benefits of human health and soil health, et cetera, is entirely plausible. So that's all I have time for here today. I hope this has been a valuable introduction to some of our work. Thank you very much. And I just welcome people to check out our websites, bionutrient.org or bionutrientinstitute.org.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. And now I am going to welcome Sara. So Sara, you can hop on, and I'm excited to hear your presentation.
Thanks so much, and thanks everyone for being here today. I'm Sara Newmark. I am the COO of True Grace, and I'm going to rush through my slides so that we can have a chance to hear from everyone and get to Q&A at the end. But I thought that it might be a little bit helpful, given that the brand that I'm with, True Grace, my company, with my partners, just launched about a month ago. And so I just wanted to really quickly give you guys an overview of who we are to kind of place you in our work that we do. So we are a vitamin and herbal supplement brand, and our vision is to be the brand that individuals seek to regenerate the health of people and planet. And this is a, if you want to go to the next slide, this is work that we've been doing for our entire careers. My partners and I have been champions and involved in the regenerative agriculture movement. And in fact, through the RODALE Institute, when I first learned about regenerative from Tim LaSalle some years ago, have really dedicated our lives to being both in business and figuring out how to champion and support a different agricultural system. Next slide. My partners again, and I have been in the dietary supplement space, which I think is a really unique position in this discussion today, because not only have we been focusing our work in regenerative agriculture, but it's being built within a brand and in an area that nutrient density is key to what we're trying to do, increasing people's access to nutrients because of the lack that they have in their lives. That is what we do in the supplement space. And so this connection between soil health and human health is very important, not only to what we are doing from an agricultural system, from a passion, but from what we're trying to accomplish in our products every day. Next slide. So using that 70 years of combined experience building some of the biggest brands in our vitamin and supplement category, we came together and said, all right, what we want to do is big. We want to make sure that we're surrounded by people that know better than we do and can help guide us. So we not only, most of brands in our space have scientific advisory boards, but we wanted to be really intentional about how we make decisions, not both on the science side for delivering efficacy, but on the agricultural side for making choices and investing in programs and opportunities that help bridge that connection between nutrient density and our soils. Next slide. So some of the reasons why we're in business every day as a supplement company is to increase access to nutrient dense foods through supplementation. I often joke that perhaps one day, if we make that nutrient density is the key to unlocking soil health and regenerative ag and our climate crisis perhaps. And I think brands like ours are uniquely positioned to help do that. But we have a really big mission on the side of people of nutrient gaps that they have every day in their diet. 1/3 of the world's population suffers from undernourishment of nutrients. I mean, in the US alone, 50% of Americans are deficient in magnesium. And we know that, and this is what we're all trying to accomplish here on this webinar and many of the panelists here today, that our food we grow today is 40% less nutrient dense than it was 50 years ago. And we take this really seriously. And I hope one day that I often joke with our company that maybe we will run ourselves out of business one day when we can know that the food that we're growing is actually as nutrient dense as we need it to be. And that is why really we've made this focus on our soils and improving soil health. Next slide. So for us, we focus, and I'm sure many of you have, seen versions of this before, but when we think about the principles that we hold true as a company when it comes to sourcing and it comes to what we're trying to accomplish, we hold these 6 principles of regenerative agriculture at our core. And I think part of what I'm doing today here is to talk about what a brand can do to support this movement, both on how we source and how we support the work of Dan and others that you'll hear today to make this connection between nutrient density and soil health, because we are basically a conduit to our consumers and to the market, and we want to make sure that we are both putting the work in to do what's right in terms of how we source our ingredients, but also that we're making sure that we're being transparent about it, that we can help fund this research, and that we're not implying that we are doing everything right and every ingredient in our product is regenerative or meets these thresholds, because it is a process. Next slide. So I think, again, just briefly what regenerative agriculture does to our soil is lead to better food. And I know we'll see some research coming up that makes this link even clearer. What we can do for our soils making the connection to more nutrient dense food. And we want to make sure that we are not only sourcing ingredients, but supporting that research, because what we don't want is people just saying that without the science behind it. But we know that better food means healthier people, and that's our job as our brand to both communicate that and help advocate for that. Next slide. So, like I said, what we're trying to, we have two fronts of our work. One is where do we source? What ingredients are in our product that meet that regenerative agriculture claim? And then what can we do to support the science that connects regenerative agriculture to more nutrient dense foods? So on our sourcing side, we partner with organizations that are farms that are regenerative, farms that have certifications that are regenerative, so that we know that their farming practices meet our desire from both a human health and a planetary health standard. Next slide. And then we also partner with organizations that are doing this work to support the research that is needed to bridge the gap between soil health and human health. Next slide. Part of the work that we've done to support and to do that is being the design team and original funders for the Soil Carbon Index. And the Soil Carbon Index is a commitment program and outcomes-based standard that looks at soil health and outcomes related to soil health so that we can actually measure. And when we measure, and we all have the same tools for how we measure, and we can start to see increases in soil organic matter, water infiltration rates, and against principles that we all agree on, we can then start making connections between those outcomes and more nutrient density. Next slide. So SCI is a program of between the Carbon Underground and Green America. Many of the design team members are on this panel, or the companies that they represent. But we also engaged over 150 other farmers, companies, suppliers, and other stakeholders to come together to make sure that we had the best minds in the room as we created this standard. The intention is that this is a global standard that works in every agricultural system, and we're agnostic to practices. We believe that farmers have their own ability to know the context of their own farms. And so while we have principles that we all align on and ways to measure against certain indicators of soil health, we believe that regenerative agriculture and soil health should be applied to every agricultural system. And these are the key elements that we look for. We have farms make commitments. You can go to that next slide, it's okay. We have the measure, and then we certify and verify that. We provide funding for farmers and technical guidance. Next slide. And then we want to make that connection between those outcomes and nutrient density. And we've partnered with RODALE to fund a 3-year program that actually does just that, that looks at research around these outcomes of principles of soil health and connects them to higher increased nutrient density. In addition to that, this program that we've funded will allow for a full-time employee in Wisconsin, which is where my company is based, to help transition farmers to a regenerative system. And we hope at the end of this, we'll be able to even more concretely connect soil health outcomes to higher nutrient density, so that we can start to communicate that better to our customers, our consumers, that what they're purchasing not only helps the planet, but helps them also. Next slide. So I would be remiss if I just didn't show you what all that work does, which is go into our foundation line of products of multivitamins and probiotics. And like I said, we're doing our work to make sure that we communicate that we're both sourcing this way, but also funding work to support. And so I would love for you guys to go check out what we're doing and stay up to date on our new products and the new ways that we're going to communicate this work that we're doing. Next slide. And oh, I think you have to maybe press, there you go. So I think you may have seen a lot of these certifications. They help guide us in how we source and how we invest in our farm partners. But you'll also see on our packaging that we're proud supporters of regenerative agriculture, because we want to make sure that people understand this connection and this work leads not only to their health, but the health of our planet as well. And I think that's it for me.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. And now we get to hear some research from Dr. Smith. So Dr. Smith is going to tell us a little bit about what's been going on with the research on bionutrients at RODALE.
Thanks so much, Jessica, and thanks for hosting this conversation. I'm really excited to tell you about the work that we're doing at RODALE Institute. We have limited time, so only be able to show you kind of the roadmap or where we're going in our initiative to link soil health and human health. And while this is a newer initiative for us, it's not new really to the Institute, because our founder, J.I. RODALE, in 1947, when he founded the RODALE Institute, wrote on a chalkboard, healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. What he's really saying was that how we treat the soil and how we grow food, or why we do it, is not just to grow a lot of stuff, but we do it to maintain health. We do it to maintain vital human health, and that's the way we should be thinking. And for the better part of the history of the RODALE Institute, we've monitored and measured and came up with systems and approaches to improve the health of the soil, so that we can improve organic or non-chemical strategies for food production. But we recognize that we haven't really focused on this other part of the equation, how soil health links to human health. And if you think about it, you know, if this is true, if it's this simple, that we just improve the health of the soil, then organic foods should clearly be healthier and more nutrient dense than non-organic foods. Because when we look at studies, or just almost every study you look at that compares organic soils or soils managed in an organic system, organic approach, the organic soils are healthier than the conventional or the standard approach. But when we looked at the literature and looked at the data, really we think that there's insufficient data to really make that claim, or emphatically make that claim. And some of the reasons is some of the data is taking organic foods maybe just from the marketplace, and we don't know where they were taken from. So naysayers might argue that they weren't really nutrient dense because they were grown organically. They were just grown in different places under different environmental conditions. Studies have controlled for that by looking at things like strawberries, for example, that are all grown in the same county, but we know that farmers have different farming practices, and those probably impact the nutrient density, as Dan was pointing out. So we think that there's a need to add more data, more science to this idea of healthy soil and organic foods being more nutrient dense. And so the first phase of our initiative is to do controlled field laboratory greenhouse studies to increase the data about that. And so we get to our farming systems trial. This is the longest running side-by-side comparison of organic and conventional grain crops in North America. So it started in 1981. There's 3 systems in the trial. An organic manure system, which follows what might be a livestock operation, where we use composted dairy manure to recycle as a source of fertility. The organic legume system, which is a low input system that uses only leguminous plants as a form of fertility. And then the conventional system, which is using standard practices, which are practiced on or put into place on over approximately 70% of all the farms, farm land in the United States today. And in 2008, recognizing the way things were going and the way farmers were changing, we introduced no-till. In the organic systems, this is a cover crop based no-till. It's not a complete no-till because we're still tilling to establish cover crops. And in the conventional system, it is a continuous no-till using herbicides and genetically modified herbicide tolerant crops. So this we thought was a place to start. And I'm going to show you just, if you can advance to the next slide, just a little bit of the data that we've started to look at. This is from 2014. We had an opportunity, because we were changing the rotations in the trial, to plant. We planted oats in every single plot in the trial, and this was part of Marissa Wagner's master's work at University of Drexel. So we had an opportunity to take a quick look at how the soil impacts the nutrients of the oats. What I can tell you without taking too much time is that the soil of the organic systems is healthier than the soil in the conventional systems. And we've been measuring them for 40 years now, and it's very clear. And it's also clear that the manure system, most likely from the use of compost and maybe also perennial crops like alfalfa and hay, have improved the soil even more than the legume organic system. So we have an expectation, or our hypothesis is that the nutritional value in the manure system would be highest and lowest in the conventional system. We measured minerals, protein, amino acids, and B vitamins. And for the most part, most of the nutrients, we did not see large differences, with the exception of the conventional no-till system, which had the lowest levels of crude protein, amino acids, as well as phosphorus and sulfur. And we were a little bit surprised that the organic legume system had the highest levels of most essential and non-essential amino acids, because we had the expectation, because we know that the organic manure system has higher levels of nitrogen, as well as sulfur, phosphorus, magnesium, a lot of higher levels of nutrients in the soil than even the legume system. But we didn't necessarily see differences between the two organic systems. But this was, I want to highlight, this was just a 1-year study and a quick look. You go to the next slide. We knew we wanted to start to look at not just grains that are mostly grown and fed to animals, because it's harder to make that link between soil health and human health when it has to go through animals. We have to then measure the nutritional quality of the animals, which I think is valid, and I know it's there's work that's been done and that's starting to measure the nutritional value of proteins. But we thought we had an opportunity in the farming systems trial to start to look at vegetables. So in 2004 and 2005, we grew tomatoes, carrots, and peppers. Basically, we carved out an area where the soybeans usually go, and we planted these crops and measured minerals, antioxidants, vitamin C, alpha and beta carotene, and lycopene. And we had the expectation that these would be higher in the organic system. Up to that point, we had seen greater levels of microbial diversity and mycorrhizal fungi in the organic systems we think play a role in these nutrients. But in the 2-year study, it was highly variable. We had 1 year where there was almost unprecedented rain events, and the next year we had near drought. And so the greatest variation was between year. And if you look at the literature, you see that this is true, that when we measure bionutrients, we tend to see high variation over time, which is one of the reasons why we think it's really important that we do these long-term systems trials, and that we're probably going to be 15 or 20 years before we start to have the real data to support this idea. But one important note that came out of this was that vitamin C and lycopene were higher in the organic manure system, but only 1 year of the trial. I didn't put it down here, but as I reviewed this paper, I also recognized that what was very clear and statistically significant was that the organic crops had less disease pressure than the conventional crops, which is we're not talking about today, but it's another benefit of improving soil health. So again, we recognize that we still need more data. The data we collect so far was not really sufficient. So we started to design the vegetable systems trial. You go to the next slide. This is one of the first trials specifically designed to look at the change in nutritional quality and compare that to changes in soil health. So it's a long-term side-by-side comparison of organic and conventional vegetable crop production. It was started in 2017, but the planning really was leading up to that. And we're monitoring soil health. We're monitoring minerals, vitamins, protein, amino acids, sugars, carbohydrates, and there's bioactive compounds, and there's secondary components in plants that we think are critical for human health. And then we're measuring human health. And while this is a 3-acre plot in the middle of our property in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, and it includes other research. You see other soil nutrient related research that might be more short-term and more focused research. It's really an initiative to solve food inequality, food insecurity, and to reduce or eliminate these chronic and non-communicable diseases across our country and the world. And so we're reaching out to scientists and medical scientists and healthcare professions and in corporations as well to try to convene as much as we can and gather as much data around the understanding of how soil health and how food production impacts human health. For brevity, I'll go on, but you can see that we have different practices. We're comparing tillage and reduced tillage within our systems, as well as different inputs in the vegetable systems trial. Let me go to the next slide. It's only been a few years and our data is just emerging. I can tell you that our team is actively processing samples and trying to get the data out. But in just 3 years, from 2016, when we took baseline data, to 2019, when we again came back and did microbiome or microbial analysis using high throughput sequencing of DNA, we saw a significant shift in the microbial communities, in this case, bacterial communities. So this field where the vegetable systems trial exists had been managed organically for 25 to 30 years. And you can see in this photo, the purple diamonds, which are our baseline soil samples before this trial started, is similar to the communities of microbes in the organic system, but the conventional systems or the conventional plots have already shifted in just 3 years. So we think this is going to be critical for nutrients. If you can go to the next slide, and we're just starting to get some of the data. We grow potatoes is one of the crops we grow in the vegetable systems trial. It's the most consumed vegetable and root crop, obviously. Lehigh is our standard potato. We contributed our potatoes grown in the Lehigh potatoes grown in the vegetable systems trial this year to the Real Food campaign that the Bionutrient Institute is running. But we also wanted to look at varieties like Purple Majesty. This is one that was specifically bred to be high in anthocyanin levels. And what I'm showing you is that in 2020, the total phenol levels, which includes anthocyanin, were higher in the organic system than the conventional system. But that wasn't the case in 2019, and we'll have a look in 2021 to see if that's the case. But we're asking the question, is this shift in soil microbiology potentially a reason for this shift? And we really need to put all the data together before we can answer that. Next slide. And just to wrap up, we're really excited about a new project that's going to be a 5-year project looking at wheat and across the country, where we're going to, like I said, we need more data that's controlled, and this study will utilize farming systems trials that have organic and conventional systems around the country, and as well as that have a tillage and a reduced till or no-till system as well. And we've been able to put together a team of soil microbiologists to start to understand how the soil microbiology impacts bionutrients. And just to finish, I want to highlight this amino acid ergothioneine. If you can go to the next slide. Studies are coming out from the health sciences standpoint. It seems like every month there's a new study demonstrating the benefit of this amino acid ergothioneine. And it is only produced by fungi or fungi-like bacteria. We know it's not synthesized by plants, so they're obtaining it from the soil, and it gets to our diet through plants that we eat. And it has high antioxidant, anti-inflammatory properties, It looks like it has the potential to mitigate neurodegenerative and cardiovascular disease, and there's probably a whole lot more. There's interest in it now with COVID, that it might be boost our immune system. So I just put that out there, that the next 5 years will be focused on in our farming systems trial in wheat, and understanding how the link between soil microbiology and this, what we think is a potent nutraceutical, ergothioneine. And with that, thank you for listening. I just wanted to thank, let's just go to the last slide for time's sake. You see Dr. Zanotti there is the director of our vegetable systems trial, and a lot of the organizations and collaborators that have supported our work. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Drew. That was really fascinating. Some great data there. So for our last speaker, I'd like to invite Tina Owens, and she can talk a little bit about what's been going on the DANONE front.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. And just wanted to say thanks to Jessica for setting this up along with Libby so that we could have this conversation. I remember when we first started discussing this that Jessica was talking about it being a litmus test for the level of interest in this topic. And I think the size of the crowd has shown us that there is, in fact, a lot of really strong interest in this. There's a few other elements that are working dynamically on this topic that stretch beyond what we typically accept as nutrition or nutrient density, like the side panel approach. I'm going to go ahead and push through some links in the chat, which Libby's going to have to help me because it looks like I sent it privately behind the scenes, so maybe she can copy and paste it. But so, here's some examples of what consumers hear when they look up this topic. They tend to hear it along 3 lines. So soil depletion, plant breeding for yield, but atmospheric carbon as well. So how much is the additional carbon that we have in the air actually impacting the size and nutrition of crops is a topic of discussion that's part of this, and not one that we've really talked about today. So you've heard about the agricultural elements that impact nutrient density, but there may be forces beyond our control that we need to consider. And then there's also work out there on plant breeding and its ability to signal to the soil whether or not it can uptake the nutrients that it needs, assuming that the nutrients are there in the soil, which is a bigger part of the discussion. Let's go to the next slide. So it may feel like this conversation has come out of nowhere, but a lot of this got kicked off at a global level in 2015 when the United Nations had the Year of the Soils. And the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations has provided a lot of really stellar reference material around this. And so if you're interested in carrying some of this information forward to others who were not able to attend today, you might start by referencing their website and searching through the available information. They're showing impacts on microbiome. They're showing impacts on biodiversity. By the way, the biodiversity conversation that we typically have is above ground and how many cover crops we planted or how many mixed species we have on an acre. And the conversation is now shifting, as you heard from Drew, to below ground. And so there's a lot of forthcoming information about what this means even for our microbiome, not just from a nutrient density standpoint. Let's go forward 2 slides, actually, Libby. I'm going to skip the next one just in the interest of time. So I mentioned that this is a dynamic conversation, and there's some things we need to break here and put back together for you. One is how much we actually know about existing nutrition. So this is one of the links that I put in the article, not just the document itself, the unmapped chemical complexity of our diet, but also this great graphic that shows the hypothesis of Albert Laszlo Barabasi, who's the head of the physics department at Northeastern and a lecturer at Harvard Medical, who coined the term nutritional dark matter. And so what a lot of people are starting to talk about is the fact that there are 26,000 biochemicals in food. We only map 150 of those under the USDA and talk about them with consumers and put them on the side panels, which means that in this context, we know less than 1% of what's in our food. So, some of the examples we heard today are about understanding how we can use mechanisms to raise or lower some of the components that we traditionally talked about as being part of nutrition. But what we also need to understand as part of this conversation is that our definition of nutrition may dramatically change, especially as it relates to AI and machine learning on this topic. And so I've got a couple of examples related to that. let's go to the next slide, Libby. So the first thing I want to share with you is where consumers are at on this, and then we'll go through some brands that have public work that they're doing on this, and end up on the AI machine learning for DANONE. So you might wonder, what do consumers know about soil health? What do they think about it? And this is one of the links I put into the chat. It's a really useful consumer research from Hartman that showed that, oh, could we go back one? That showed that in 2020, consumers see soil health as a unifying factor in their organic food and purchases. So they're already believing that this is part of their purchases in the organic sector, driving better flavor, better nutrition, and better ecology. And so in case you're wondering or need proof internally that consumers have an interest in this, Hartman's a very reputable consumer research firm. You might snag that from the chat and use it for your internal discussions. Go to the next slide. And then as it relates to some of the large CPGs that have made commitments or public research that's around this, RODALE is in here. They're actually working with MSU, but at the behest of Gerber, which is owned by Nestle. And so they very recently, in July of this year, announced that they were going to undertake unprecedented research into the link between sustainability, regenerative agriculture, and nutrient-dense outcomes as it relates to baby food. And what's really notable about this is that Nestle is the world's largest food company. And so, if you can extrapolate that they would learn from this lessons that could be applied elsewhere within their entire supply chain and their other brands. Go to the next slide. Try and keep moving so that we can have Q&A at the end. And then another one that's really worth noting that just was announced in October is Washington State University being awarded $10 million, specifically to increase nutrition in food, specific to 6 crops, specific to some brands. Patagonia Provisions is pretty notable. A lot of people pay attention when they move. But then also that it's actually cross-departmental within Washington State University, Johns Hopkins, and includes the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. The USDA is also seeing a value in this and is funding this work. And so, you can look to see how this topic will continue to get wind under its wings as this research unfolds, along with what you already heard from our previous panelists today. And I think I've got one more slide on this topic, and it's the BRIGHTSEED DANONE piece. So within DANONE North America, we have a partnership with BRIGHTSEED, which goes back to the AI and machine learning that I mentioned, where we're mapping the molecular, BRIGHTSEED is mapping the molecular level of soy that goes into our silk plant-based beverages. And it's intending to take that molecular mapping and identify the bioactive compounds that are within it. But here's the new part. It then uses AI and machine learning to translate that to human health outcomes in a manner of weeks or months that used to take years or decades, and then immediately allows them to move into human health trials. And so we have a multi-year partnership with them. They are specifically, BRIGHTSEED is specifically looking to take bioactive compounds from foods that can replace pharmaceuticals that food companies can then use for the food as medicine movement, essentially. So I wanted to put all of those on your radar. Also, the first link that I shared, Libby, we can take the slides down. The first link that I shared is a publication that just came out a couple of months ago that shows the link between Regen Ag and human health, and 227 references, I think it is, publicly available information that shows that there is actually a correlation. And so if you need further proof, you might look that up and share it internally along with the Hartman research. Now I'll turn it back to Jessica.
Great, thank you so much. And actually, if all the panelists can go ahead and hop on, we have 5 minutes and about 1,000 questions. So I am going to just try and decide which one to take. So here's one that I think is on a lot of people's minds as we're learning about bionutrients and talking about nutrition in what we eat. So what is the connection between these bionutrients and human health? So how do we make that, there's one carrot that has 3 times as nutrient dense as another carrot. What does that actually translate to in human health, or do we know that yet? So that's the one question that I will pose in the time we have left.
I would just say, just because a carrot has 3 times as much calcium or copper than another carrot does not mean it's 3 times as nutrient dense. this term nutrient dense is one that we were throwing around, but doesn't have a definition in many ways similar to regenerative. There's a general like impulse and intuition that there's something there, but we actually can't say things with confidence right now, at least empirically. And I would say personally, from the perspective of the BFA, that human health trials are the conclusion to the whole data collection process, going from soil health and management to nutrient levels in crops, and that we should be defining nutrient density or bionutrients by a food's effect on a human, right? That would be the real definition, is what results occur, not what we are presuming to think we understand. Like Tina said, with the nutritional dark matter, 99% of the compounds we don't even, know what they are. So it's really, I would say it's a pre-competitive space. It's an opportunity for deep learning. As Drew was saying, we have, much research needs to be done. But yeah, if it doesn't correlate to human health, it's probably the wrong definition.
I might just add, I agree with Dan. I think that, probably the second through fourth phase of our initiative is how do we get to animal feeding trials, ultimately human trials to really test this. And I think, when we talk about nutrient density, yeah, I was throwing things out, and it's magnesium, calcium, carotenoids, flavonoids, but we're playing around with how we create an index for each crop and how it's grown to pull it together. That includes all these nutrients. It's based on the recommended daily allowance, because you might have really high of one thing, but it's not, we're not deficient in that nutrient. So it may not be as important to get as another nutrient. And then we need to include the carbohydrate or the sugars or the caloric value, which is in my mind where we go from concentration or level to density. If a nutrient is more dense, it's based on its concentration per kilocalorie, if that makes sense. But those exist, but we need to pull them together in a concerted way. So that's one approach, I think.
All right, any last comments from the panelists?
I know Dan wasn't able to be on camera, but if anyone's interested in the bionutrient meter that he mentioned, I'm holding one. And so there is actually the possibility to scan food, currently 10 crops. It's very exciting. There's a lot of people extrapolating that will end up in our cell phones at some point in the not too distant future. And so just food for thought to leave you for the day.
Very cool. All right, I will hand it back over to Libby. Thank you so much to our panelists. This was such an informative session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica, and thanks to all of our panelists. It's really been such a fantastic webinar. I can see from all of the responses we're getting, questions that we're getting asked right now, and emails I'm getting even as well. So many folks are really excited about today's conversation. And I'm excited to see where this thing keeps moving forward in conversation in the industry in the next few years. A quick note that we'd like to invite all of you to consider joining us on December 8th. We're bringing a panel of Black scholars, farmers, and activists together to explore just what Black farmers need today, what it's been in the past, and what it can be in the future. That'll be at 1 o'clock Eastern at 10 a.m. Pacific. I will share information about that webinar with everyone in email, as I've mentioned in the chat a few times, and I'll say it again right now. We are so incredibly thankful to have over 120 individuals here today joining us for the webinar. I'll remind you that you can check out more not only about this webinar, but a number of the Organic Center's science education opportunities online on organic-center/events. You can find that full on-demand library of webinars there. Thanks so much to Dan, Drew, Sara, and Tina, and Jessica as well for your insightful presentations today, and for really starting, I think, a really important conversation, as I've mentioned. On behalf of the staff and members of the Organic Trade Association and the Organic Center, we greatly appreciate your time and commitment to organic. As a reminder, again, the link to view today's recording, all of the slides, all of the links that we've shared in the chat and that we haven't yet shared in the chat, but we will put an email, will all be sent out to all the registrants in the next 2 business days. On behalf of the Organic Trade Association and the Organic Center, we hope you join us for future educational opportunities, and please have a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone.